Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Jim Fitzpatrick, exclusively on ASBN.com.
Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. You're watching another episode of The Small Business Show, exclusively right here at ASBN.com and now streaming on Roku, Fire TV, and Apple TV. Today we're discussing how to clarify your business's core message. Joining us now is founder and chief message strategist to find the red thread and keynote speaker, Tamsen Webster. Tamsen is a former TEDx executive producer and has shared her expertise for major companies and organizations like Johnson & Johnson, Harvard Medical School, and Intel. Welcome, Tamsen. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And now you can add to that incredible resume. You've been a guest here on ASBN.com. So that's
absolutely
what a way to top off your career, right?
It is a highlight, and I am excited to be here. So thanks so much.
So before we get started in all of the questions that I've got for, and I'm really looking forward to today's interview, tell our audience that are not as familiar with you as we are here a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this point.
I have spent most of my life helping people and organizations figure out how to get other people to see them as good, important, smart, capable, useful, impactful as they themselves do. So that means I've spent a lot of time really fascinated by this idea of what makes people make decisions? How do we help people really get buy-in into new or different ideas? That applies to what is it that makes something stand out as different to somebody else? But most importantly, how can I make that simple enough so that busy business professionals are actually able to do a lot of that message design work themselves? That's actually my biggest mission in life, is to figure out how to make it easy for people to make that power clear on their own.
Well, we are glad that is your mission, and we're glad that you're sharing that with us today. You have a concept called the red thread. What is that?
So the red thread is very much this, kind of the official thinking about it is that it's the through line, the logical progression of ideas. It's really how we make sense of the world. And I like to describe it as a story we tell ourselves about why two things are related. And the way that translates into the business world is it's this oftentimes unspoken, kind of based in silent assumptions, reason why a company or an individual founder works the way that they do. It's the beliefs that drive their behavior that ultimately set the brand and the impression of the organization.
Okay. Once a business has clarified its message, how should it integrate this message into its overall marketing strategy?
Well, what's interesting to me, and I've spent 25 years in brand design and marketing and sales messaging, kind of looking at it from all sides. And I am of the firm belief that messaging, as we think about it, actually sits in between business strategy, product strategy, and both internal and external communication strategy. Okay. Because it is where all of the pieces of the business really intersect. It's how you talk about what you do to the people either who do it for you or for whom you do it. It's about how you talk to those particular audiences in order to achieve particular outcomes. And it's even how you have to talk internally with the organization to understand what does the business need to do in order to achieve those outcomes that it's set for itself. And it really comes down to having that agreement on the inside first about what are those assumptions that really drive the business, why it does what it does, but critically, why does it do what it does in that particular way? And it's a fascinating discovery, because a lot of times the assumptions that really drive a business are not the ones that we think we think they are. They end up being just really much deeper guidelines for the organization. There's a professor out of UVA, James Duterte, I believe his name is, who calls it kind of the deep rules of the organization. And it's really about articulating those deep rules, those sound assumptions, that red thread, so that everybody involved in the organization really understands it.
This must be a huge wake-up call for the companies that you do business with, right? So that everybody is reading off of the same sheet of music, as they say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes it's like, oh, actually, we're really about this. Or, very common in businesses is, some of the thing they take rightful pride in are essentially table stakes for what they do. So
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time, for instance, working with higher education institutions, and they would often say, well, we are student-centered and we're beautifully diverse and we've got high academics. But if you think about it, if you're a college or an independent school that doesn't have those things, like what are you doing?
Maybe you're not a college.
Right. So
Right.
it's really thinking about, okay, those are the baseline, some of those things, but then there's a particular way on top of that that businesses really go about what they do. And so it can be, particularly since the process that I run my clients through really comes down to identifying what are only two load-bearing elements of why they do what they do in a particular way.
Sure.
And that discipline of really saying, of all the other things that are out there, what are these two things? That can be, as you say, really eye-opening for companies, but it is possible, right? It's in fact how the iPod, long may it rest in peace, really got forward, because Apple said, you know what, of all the things that we can emphasize about this particular product, we're going to emphasize variety and portability. And what this is really distinctive about it is we're going to put it into one small package.
Sure, sure. It's interesting, but I'm, as a business owner myself and a serial entrepreneur, I've opened up a number of companies and run companies. It comes to my mind that this may be the first time that the company is realizing some of these things when you go in and work with them. Because I think there's a huge assumption there, right, from the business owner to their team that goes, well, of course we do X, Y, and Z. Doesn't everybody know that? And maybe to your point, even though the owner says it's X, Y, and Z, it's really A, B, and C that's the core, right?
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's pretty rare that there's that big of a division, but where you often see the division, and this is why I think this idea, message design really belongs at the center and the top levels of the organization, is oftentimes you see that biggest gap between kind of the ongoing strategy of the organization and the public or more brand focused messaging.
Right.
And it's probably piling on them, but great example that most people know is United Airlines, right?
Yeah.
Like their messaging is fly the friendly skies.
Right.
But, if we take into account some broken guitars or some passengers dragged off of planes, there's some actual behaviors there that don't exactly match that. So in my point of view, it's like, well, if they're about, let's say, maximizing shareholder value, or they are about really making sure that the business traveler feels well treated, which I think most people would agree that, I don't think that they would lose much, right, by saying, hey, this is what we're really all about. But it's the gap between those two that can really create some long-term problems. So for me, it's about really going to the core and making sure that the folks that really set what do you do and how do you do it are, in many ways, some of the strongest voices at the table to help set that outward articulation of what that is.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So how can a business ensure that its clarified message remains relevant over time?
Well, that's part of what I've discovered in my work is that the part of what happens when you ask people to really go to these, I call them bedrock beliefs of the organization. And these aren't invented. They're not aspirational. They are, I put them through this exercise of saying, if this is a core element, let's say of, variety, or if the core element of a company's approach is accountability, they have to define in a way that most people would intuitively understand why that must be part of how they address the big problem that they solve in a market. So they have to do that. And generally, because businesses don't dramatically shift over time the problems that they solve in the market, they do over time, but generally they're about one or two big things. What I found is that those underlying principles about why they approach solving that problem in a particular way really don't change over time. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to find this out. I mean, I have yet to find any person anywhere in an organization that feels like they have enough time or enough money to having to keep revisit these kinds of concepts.
That's
so
right.
My philosophy is get it right the first time, really understand it, and then use that as a guidance, not just for your external messaging, but for some of those times when you discover that maybe we don't like what this says about us, you can use that as an opportunity to start to reset and refocus the overall strategy of the organization.
Sure, sure. What other advice do you have for businesses that are just starting the process of clarifying their core messaging?
So, all of it, and I don't, that is not an overstatement. Almost all of it comes down to articulating what I call the core question that the business answers. It's really the question that you exist to answer, or that a product exists to answer, or that an approach exists to answer. But as opposed to a lot of times, like, what problem do you solve? Which can sometimes get us into the realm of solving problems that our customers and clients don't know that they have. This is really about identifying that core question that the audience already knows they have. And just the fact that it's an unanswered question is a problem for them, right?
Sure.
So the work is to find the most urgent, most important version of that question that your ideal audience is already asking, that your business, product, service idea exists to answer. If you get clarity on that, everything else becomes a lot clearer. Because then you can say, well, what is our answer? Why is that our answer? Why are those elements the way that they are? But it all comes back to, what is that urgent, important question that your audience is already asking?
Yep. And this is a topic that I've got about 14 more questions for that time won't allow. But Tamsen Webster, founder and chief message strategist, to find the red thread and keynote speaker, as I mentioned. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Very much appreciate it. I know that our viewers will get a lot out of your visit here with us today. And I would love to do a follow-up with you to talk more about this very, very important topic that businesses really do need to listen to and to delve into a little bit further, right?
I would love that. So till next time.
Okay, that's right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Jim Fitzpatrick, exclusively on ASBN.com.